My name is Khalid ibn Saleh and I am 47 years old. I was born into a house where the call to prayer was louder than laughter, where verses were memorized before feelings were named. From the time I could walk, I was taught that my worth was obedience, my safety submission, my future service. By the time I became a sheik, people lowered their eyes when I spoke. They kissed my hand. They called me chosen. They believed I carried light. But every night when the mosque emptied and the carpets cooled, I felt hollow, like a well dug, deep with no water inside. I knew the Quran by heart. I knew tafsir, fiqh, chains of narration, rules for purity, rules for fear. I preached with confidence, but inside I lived with a constant tightening in my chest. Jannah was promised, but never felt close. Jahannam was described in detail, and it followed me everywhere. I prayed 5 times a day, sometimes more, yet my prayers felt like echoes hitting stone. I asked Allah for peace, and silence answered me back. My father was a respected imam. My mother measured love through discipline. In our home, questions were weakness. Doubt was rebellion. I learned early how to bury curiosity under certainty. When Christian names appeared in lessons, they were warnings, not people. Isa was mentioned, but distant, reduced, stripped of breath. I never imagined him looking back at me. From the outside, my life looked complete. I had students, authority, respect, and a marriage built on duty. From the inside, I was tired. I felt like I was holding my breath through life, afraid that if I exhaled, everything would collapse. Sometimes late at night, I would sit alone and wonder why a God so powerful felt so unreachable. I hated myself for those thoughts. I repented for them. I punished them with more fasting, more study, more control. There were moments I will never forget. A boy once asked me after a lesson, "Sheik, how do we know Allah loves us?" The room went silent. I gave him the correct answer, the safe answer, the answer I was trained to give. But that night his question followed me home. How did I know? Fear kept me obedient. Habit kept me faithful. But love felt like something for other people. I carried secrets no one saw. Panic before sermons, anger at small mistakes, sleepless nights filled with verses that sounded more like threats than comfort. I was surrounded by people yet deeply alone. I thought something was wrong with me, that maybe my heart was defective. I never imagined the problem was not my hunger, but what I was being fed. If you are listening to this right now, I want to ask you something gently. If stories like mine matter to you, if you believe truth should not be hidden, help these testimonies travel. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment, even if only with a prayer. Share it, because voices like mine survive only when others carry them forward. I did not know then that my life was already approaching a breaking point. I did not know that power would fail me, knowledge would collapse, and death itself would interrupt my certainty. I only knew that I was a respected man with an empty heart, standing on the edge of something I could not yet see, but would soon be forced to face. Every morning I adjusted my robe, my tone, my authority, as if faith were a performance that could be perfected. People trusted me with their sins, their marriages, their dying parents, and I gave them answers while hiding my own fractures. I told myself this was sacrifice. I told myself this weight was honor. Yet a quiet voice inside kept asking why truth required so much pretending. Sometimes I would stand before the Kaaba, surrounded by millions, and feel smaller than ever. The black stone did not answer me. The crowd moved and I moved with it, but my soul felt still, stuck, unheard. I blamed myself. I always blamed myself. I believed if I tried harder, believed stronger, felt less, God would finally draw near. I did not understand that emptiness can be a warning, not a failure. I did not understand that hunger can be mercy. I only knew that I was respected by men and uncertain before God. And in that fragile space between confidence and fear, my story was already changing, even before my heart knew how close the darkness and the light truly were. I wish I could tell you I sensed hope then, but all I felt was pressure, silence, and the terrifying suspicion that everything I trusted was about to be tested by fire. The night my faith began to fracture did not arrive with warning or ceremony, but with a sudden crushing pain in my chest that stole my breath and dropped me to the marble floor of my study. One moment I was reviewing notes for Fajr, correcting a student's recitation in my head, and the next my vision blurred as if someone had poured ink into the ore. I tried to stand, to call for help, to remember a dua that could shield me, but my legs failed and fear rushed in faster than any prayer. As I collapsed, my mind raced through verses I had taught for decades, promises of protection that suddenly felt distant and thin. People think scholars face death with calm, but terror clawed at me because all I could think of was judgment, scales, fire, and whether I had ever been enough. My heart pounded like it was trying to escape my body, and with every beat, certainty cracked just a little more. Faces appeared above me, distorted and panicked, voices shouting my name, calling for an ambulance, reciting verses louder as if volume could command mercy. Someone pressed my hand and told me to say the Shahada, and I tried, I truly tried, but the words caught in my throat like stones. In that moment, instead of peace, a terrible question rose inside me, louder than pain, sharper than fear. What if everything I trusted could not carry me through this? The ambulance light smeared red across the night as I drifted in and out, my body heavy, my thoughts unraveling like old cloth. I remembered childhood lessons about hellfire, about angels who strike faces, about graves that squeeze, and instead of motivating me, they hollowed me out. I had obeyed, memorized, enforced, and defended, yet lying there I felt like a man who had studied maps but never found home. In the emergency room, machines beeped, doctors spoke in urgent fragments, and someone cut my robe open, exposing a chest that felt fragile and foreign. I wanted to ask God why he felt so far away, but even that prayer felt unsafe, like another sin being recorded. As the pain surged again, a strange calm slipped in behind it, and I wondered with sudden clarity if this was how my story ended. I thought of my wife, my students, my father's proud eyes, and shame burned because I realized I had no assurance to give them. The doctor shouted numbers, someone pressed hard on my chest, and suddenly the world narrowed to pressure, noise, and fading light. In my final conscious thought, I did not see paradise or punishment, only a vast darkness opening, silent and absolute. Then my heart stopped, the sounds vanished, and everything I believed I knew about faith dissolved as I crossed into the unknown. There was no scream, no tunnel of light at first, only a weightless falling sensation that stripped away time and thought. I felt exposed in a way I had never known, as if every intention, every hidden motive, every quiet hypocrisy was suddenly visible. The authority I carried in life meant nothing here, and that realization was more terrifying than the pain that had killed me. I wanted to reach back, to undo 1,000 certainties, but there was no body to move, no voice to argue. Everything slowed, stretched, and deepened like I was being pulled toward a truth too heavy for language. I realized with dread that I was fully awake, more aware than I had ever been in life. This was not sleep, not imagination, not punishment yet, but a crossing that allowed no denial. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a presence began to form, and instinctively I knew my questions were about to be answered. Fear surged again, not of fire or angels, but of truth itself, of seeing reality without the shields I had built. I sensed that whatever awaited me would change everything, and there would be no returning unchanged. The darkness did not feel empty anymore, but charged, alive, as if it were holding its breath with me. I understood then that my crisis of faith had not begun in the hospital, but years earlier, and this was its unveiling. Every suppressed doubt, every silenced question, every moment of fear dressed as devotion stood before me without mercy. I knew I was crossing into something no sermon had prepared me for, something far more real than doctrine. And as that awareness settled, the last thread of my old certainty finally snapped, making space for what came next. I did not know it yet, but death had only begun speaking, and I was about to listen. The silence broke, and something approached me from beyond the dark without warning. Now death was not silent like I had imagined. It was louder than life, sharper than fear, clearer than any sermon I had ever preached. I became aware before I saw anything, aware in a way that stripped excuses from me. I knew I was dead, yet I was more awake than I had ever been while breathing. There was no body, no pain, no hospital lights, but there was consciousness, heavy and exposed. It felt as if my soul had been pulled out of hiding and placed under a light that missed nothing. I sensed my body below me without seeing it, sensed people working desperately over something that was no longer mine. The separation was unmistakable. I was no longer Khalid, the Sheik with a name and a role. I was simply me, bare and undeniable. Fear, unlike anything I had known, surged through me because I realized I could no longer perform, no longer explain, no longer defend myself with knowledge or status. Every intention I had ever buried rose to the surface. Every time I chose safety over truth, authority over humility, fear over love, it all pressed against me at once. I expected angels as I was taught, harsh and terrifying, but instead there was an overwhelming sense of holiness approaching, a purity so intense it felt like it would tear me apart. Judgment felt imminent, not loud or violent, but absolute, like standing before a mirror that reflected not my actions but my heart. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. I wanted to argue, but there was no one to argue with yet. The darkness around me was not empty. It was alive, filled with awareness, and within it I felt small. Not because I was insignificant, but because I finally understood how little control I had ever possessed. I felt the weight of my life all at once, the good, the harm, the pride disguised as obedience. I thought of verses about scales and records, and terror clenched me because I knew I could not balance them myself. Then something changed. The pressure did not increase, it softened, not disappearing but shifting like a storm breaking open. From within the darkness came a presence that did not rush or threaten. It moved with authority, yet also with gentleness that felt impossible. As it drew near, the fear I carried met something else, something warmer, something that did not accuse yet did not ignore truth. I sensed eyes on me before I saw anything, eyes that knew me fully. Not the version I showed people, not the scholar or the leader, but the frightened child I had been before I learned how to hide behind certainty. A voice spoke, and when it said my name, it did not sound like judgment. It sounded like recognition. Khalid. Hearing my name spoken that way shattered me. No title, no honorific, just my name, spoken with intimacy and authority at once. I knew instantly this was Isa, Jesus, the one I had reduced to a footnote, a prophet stripped of power in my teachings. But here he was, not distant, not weak, not borrowed from another faith, but alive, radiant, undeniable. His presence was overwhelming, not because of fear, but because of truth wrapped in compassion. I wanted to look away, but I could not. I wanted to kneel, but there was no body to kneel with. I felt exposed, unknown, and strangely for the first time safe. I realized with shock that this was not an encounter born of imagination or culture. This was reality, breaking through everything I had been taught to avoid. His holiness was not cold or condemning, it was pure, and that purity revealed my flaws without crushing me. I understood then why people had followed him, why they had left everything. In his presence, arguments felt small and fear felt unnecessary. Yet the weight of my life pressed harder because now I knew who I stood before. I wanted to speak, to explain my devotion, my sacrifices, my obedience, but words felt meaningless. He already knew, he had always known. There was no anger in him, no disappointment the way I feared, only sorrow, not for himself, but for how long I had lived without knowing him. The darkness around us no longer felt threatening, but like a boundary holding back something greater. I sensed that this meeting was not accidental, not symbolic, but purposeful. My heart, if I could still call it that, trembled because I knew this encounter would demand something from me. He did not force anything. He did not raise his voice. His authority needed no volume. Just being near him redefined everything I thought I understood about God. I realized then that death had not ended my story. It had interrupted my illusions, and standing before Jesus, forbidden, denied, misunderstood, I knew the life I had lived could not survive this truth unchanged. This was only the beginning of what he was about to reveal, and I felt both terror and hope collide within me as he drew closer and prepared to speak again. He did not begin with accusations or lists of sins the way I expected. There was no shouting, no display meant to terrify me into submission. Instead, Jesus looked at me with a clarity that felt heavier than judgment, because it was honest. In his gaze, I saw my life unfold, not as a series of crimes, but as a long story of fear. He showed me moments I had buried so deep I forgot they existed. The first time I chose silence instead of truth because I feared losing respect. The first time I corrected someone harshly, not for God, but to protect my authority. The countless times I spoke about mercy while living under terror. None of it was exaggerated, none of it was minimized, it was simply shown. and somehow that was worse and better at the same time. He did not condemn me for my discipline or my devotion. He exposed the lie beneath it, the belief that I had to earn love, that God was always distant, always measuring, always waiting for me to fail. I felt shame rise in me, but He did not let it drown me. You were faithful to what you were taught, He said, and His voice carried sorrow, not approval. But fear kept you from knowing me. Those words cut deeper than any rebuke. Fear had shaped everything: fear of hell, fear of people, fear of being wrong, fear of losing control. I realized then that much of what I call faith was survival. He showed me rituals I had repeated without rest, movements of the body meant to quiet the soul, but never reaching it. I saw myself bowing, standing, reciting, while my heart remained clenched. Ritual without love becomes a prison, He said, and I felt the truth of it in my very being. Then He showed me the cross, not as an image or symbol, but as reality. I felt the weight of it, the cost of it, the humility of God choosing suffering instead of domination. I had been taught the cross was weakness, a contradiction. Yet here it was the clearest revelation of power I had ever seen. Power that did not crush, authority that did not threaten, love that did not demand payment. I understood then that grace was not permission to sin, as I had been told. It was the courage to stop hiding. He showed me scripture, words I had dismissed without reading. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I had spent my life exhausted, and no verse had ever offered rest before. Only warning, only instruction, only fear. Jesus did not erase truth. He fulfilled it. He did not deny holiness. He embodied it. And in His presence, holiness no longer meant distance. It meant nearness without terror. He told me something that still echoes in me now. Many worship God, but do not know Him. When He said it, I knew He was not only speaking about Islam. He was speaking about religion itself, about hearts that hide behind obedience while never surrendering. That truth shook me because it included me completely. Then He told me I would return, not as a reward, not as a threat, but as a calling. You have seen, He said. Now you must choose. The weight of that choice pressed on me harder than death itself. I wanted to stay there, in His presence, where fear had no voice. I wanted to be done with the world, with roles and expectations and danger. But He did not ask me what was comfortable. He asked me what was true. You will go back, He said, and you will live with what you have seen. I felt panic rise. Return meant risk. Return meant loss. Return meant facing everything I had built my life on. He did not promise safety. He did not promise ease. He promised Himself, and somehow that was enough. Before I could ask more questions, before I could beg Him to choose for me, the light around Him began to shift. His presence remained steady, but I sensed the moment ending. Remember, He said, I know your name. As those words settled into me, I felt myself being pulled away, not violently, but firmly, like being sent rather than expelled. The darkness returned, but it no longer felt empty or hostile. It felt like a passage. I realized then that I was carrying something back with me that could not be undone. Knowledge without fear, truth with love, a name spoken by God Himself. And as everything began to collapse inward, pulling me back toward life, one terrifying thought filled me. I was returning to a world where Jesus was forbidden, denied, and dangerous, and I had seen him face to face. I woke up gasping like I had been dragged out of deep water, my chest burning, my throat dry, my body trembling as machines beeped around me. White light stabbed my eyes and unfamiliar voices rushed in, calling my name, telling me to stay awake, telling me I was alive, alive. The word felt foreign, almost wrong. My hand shook as I realized I was back in my body, heavy and aching, confined by wires and tubes. The doctor said my heart had stopped. He said it was a miracle. People always use that word, but they do not understand how terrifying miracles can be. Because I knew I had not simply survived, I had returned. And with that return came fear deeper than any pain in my chest. As nurses moved around me, I lay silent, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of what I had seen. The way Jesus spoke my name. The way his presence felt more real than this room. I wondered if I had lost my mind, if oxygen deprivation had created a dream too vivid to ignore. But even as doubt tried to rise, peace lingered beneath it, steady and quiet, unlike anything I had known. Recovery should have been simple. My body healed faster than expected, but my soul was in chaos. Family visited, praising God loudly, thanking Allah for sparing me. I nodded, smiled weakly, repeated the right phrases, while inside I felt like a man carrying a secret too dangerous to speak. I was terrified of my own thoughts. If I said his name out loud, what would happen to me? What would happen to my family? My position? My life? At night, when the ward grew quiet, fear returned with force. I dreamed of darkness again, but this time it was interrupted by light, not blinding, not overwhelming, but familiar. I would wake with tears on my face, my heart racing, feeling both comforted and hunted. I avoided sleep because sleep reminded me of him. Days after I returned home, alone in my study, I did something I never imagined doing. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone and typed a word I had warned others against for years: Bible. I downloaded an app, my heart pounding like I was committing a crime. I told myself it was curiosity, research, something academic. But when I opened it, the words felt alive, sharp, gentle, exposing. I read about Jesus not as a prophet listed in comparison, but as a person who spoke with authority and tenderness. The truth will set you free. Free. That word pierced me. Freedom was not a concept I had ever associated with God. Only obedience. Only fear. I read in secret, always listening for footsteps, always ready to close the screen. Shame wrapped around me, but hunger pushed me forward. One night, overwhelmed, I set the phone down and covered my face with my hands. I whispered, barely forming the words, afraid of hearing my own voice. Jesus, if you are real, if what I saw was you, I don't know how to do this. The moment the words left me, something shifted. Not dramatic, not loud. A stillness settled over me like a hand placed gently on my racing heart. For the first time in my life, prayer did not feel like performance. It felt like being heard. Tears came without effort, not tears of terror but release. I did not see him. I did not hear a voice, but I felt his presence, unmistakable, patient, near. Fear did not disappear, but it no longer ruled me. I realized then that belief was no longer an argument in my mind. It was a relationship forming in secret, fragile and powerful. I stayed there on the floor longer than I can measure, whispering words that felt unsafe yet necessary. I did not ask for answers. I asked for courage. When I finally stood, nothing in my world had changed outwardly. I was still a sheikh, still expected to lead, still surrounded by danger if discovered. But inside, something irreversible had begun. I knew I could not unsee what I had seen or unknow who had called my name. And as fear and peace wrestled within me, one truth settled quietly but firmly. I was no longer alone. The change did not announce itself loudly, but people noticed. I stopped volunteering for sermons. I postponed lessons. I told myself I needed rest after the hospital. But deep inside, I knew I was pulling away because every word I used to preach felt heavier now, dangerous in my mouth. Verses I once quoted with confidence now echoed differently, hollow where they once felt solid. When students asked questions, I hesitated. When they looked to me for certainty, my silence unsettled them. Rumors began quietly the way they always do. Khalid is tired. Khalid is weak. Khalid has been shaken. My family noticed before the mosque did. My wife asked why I no longer led prayers at home with the same fire. My father studied my face longer than usual, his eyes sharp with concern, masked as love. I tried to explain without explaining, but fear tangled my words. Inside me, scripture burned, words from the Bible replaying in my mind at the most inconvenient moments. Love your enemies. Do not fear those who can kill the body. Come to me. These words followed me into meetings, into prayer halls, into my own bed. I tried to silence them, reminding myself of consequences, of honor, of safety. But something in me had shifted. Neutrality became unbearable. I could not unknow the peace I had tasted. Fellow imams called me aside, their voices low, their smiles tight. They warned me about confusion, about Western influence, about weakness after trauma. One of them asked directly if I had been reading forbidden material. My heart raced, but my mouth denied before my soul could catch up. The lie tasted bitter, and I knew I could not live like that forever. At home, the pressure grew sharper. My father confronted me one evening, his voice trembling between authority and fear. He reminded me of our lineage, our responsibility, the shame I would bring if I strayed. My mother cried, asking what she had done wrong. Emotional blackmail wrapped itself in love, and it hurt more than threats. I spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between truth and survival. Every path forward carried loss. Scripture did not promise me safety, it promised me a cross. One evening, alone, I opened the Bible again, hands shaking. I read the words, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that truth settle on me. I realized then that silence was already a choice, and it was costing me my soul. The following week, during a private discussion with a trusted colleague, the moment came. He spoke casually about Isa, dismissively, confidently. Something in me broke open. Before fear could stop me, I heard my own voice speak words I had rehearsed only in secret. "I believe Jesus is more than we say he is." The room went still. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might stop again. His face changed instantly, suspicion hardening into alarm. I knew in that second that there was no returning to safety. Later that night, alone again, I fell to my knees, shaking, tears streaming without restraint. "Jesus," I said aloud for the first time without whispering, "I choose you." Saying his name openly felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. I did not feel fireworks or visions. I felt resolve settle into me, quiet but unmovable. I understood that following him would cost me everything I had built, but not following him would cost me who I was becoming. Fear still lived in me, but it no longer had the final word. I stood up from that floor knowing consequences were coming. Reputation would fall, relationships would fracture, danger would increase. Yet beneath it all was a peace that did not depend on circumstances. For the first time, I was not pretending before God. I was not performing for people. I had chosen, and that choice had marked me. Whatever followed, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I could never go back to who I was before. The fallout came faster than I expected and harsher than I was prepared for. What began as whispers hardened into walls closing around me. Invitations stopped, messages went unanswered. Faces that once softened when I entered a room now tightened with suspicion or turned away completely. I was quietly removed from responsibilities without explanation, as if my absence would erase the problem I represented. My name, once spoken with honor, became something people avoided saying aloud. At home, the atmosphere thickened with grief and anger. My father finally confronted me without pretense. He did not shout. That was worse. His voice was calm, controlled, carrying the weight of generations. He asked me directly if I had abandoned Islam. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not lie this time. I told him I had encountered Jesus and that I could not deny what I knew to be true. The silence that followed felt like a death. My mother wept openly, clutching her chest as if I had stabbed her. My father's face hardened, not with rage, but with disappointment so deep it cut sharper than any blow. He told me I was no longer his son in the way he understood sonship. Blood was blood, but loyalty had limits. I was asked to leave the family home that night. I packed quietly, my hands shaking, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall until the door closed behind me. Walking away from that house felt like tearing flesh from bone. Alone in a small rented room, the silence pressed in. I replayed every word, every look, wondering if obedience to truth required this level of loss. Doubt tried to creep back in, whispering that peace was not worth abandonment. But when I prayed, when I spoke Jesus' name in that emptiness, I did not feel forsaken. I felt held. Relatives called to warn me, some pleading, some threatening. Friends distanced themselves to protect their own families. I learned quickly how fragile belonging can be when it is built on conformity. One conversation stands burned into me. A close cousin visited unannounced, his face pale with fear. He begged me to recant publicly, to say it was stress, illness, confusion. He said it would all go away if I just denied it. I looked at him and realized he was more afraid for himself than for me. I told him I could not deny what had given me life. He left without another word. That night I understood something painful and freeing. Love controlled by fear is not love, it is bondage. I did not seek revenge, I did not expose anyone. I simply let the truth stand, and that alone revealed how brittle the system was. In the midst of isolation, help came from unexpected places. A coded message online, a late night video call with believers whose faces I could not fully see. An underground church streamed quietly through a screen, worship whispered instead of shouted. These people did not care about my former title. They did not ask for proof. They welcomed me as I was, broken and learning. For the first time, I experienced family without fear. We prayed together, laughed softly, cried openly. There was no performance, no hierarchy, only shared dependence on grace. Pride fell away, replaced by something gentler. Peace grew where status once lived, but safety was still uncertain. One afternoon, a neighbor warned me that questions were being asked, official questions. My name had reached ears that did not tolerate deviation. Fear surged again, cold and sharp. I packed a bag and prepared mentally for interrogation, for detention, for worse. Yet even then, peace did not leave me. It sat beside fear, stronger, steadier. I remembered Jesus' words that those who lose family for his sake will find more. I did not know what tomorrow held, but I knew who held me. As night fell, I knelt and prayed not for escape, but for faithfulness. Whatever came, I wanted to remain true. I realized then that being cast out by blood had made room for grace I could never have imagined. I was poorer in the world's eyes, but richer in spirit. And though danger hovered close, my heart was no longer imprisoned by fear. The knock I expected did not come that night, but I sensed it would someday. Still, I slept. For the first time in years, I slept deeply, trusting that whatever happened next, I did not walk alone anymore. The longer I lived with what I had seen, the clearer the message became, not as a warning shouted in fear, but as a truth unfolding slowly in my spirit. Jesus had not sent me back to argue religion or win debates. He sent me back as a witness to something far more uncomfortable, that it is possible to worship God daily and still not know Him. I thought of my years of fasting, teaching, correcting others, and I understood now that devotion without surrender can become another form of hiding. I began to see my past differently, not with hatred, but with clarity. I remembered the boy who asked me about love and how I had answered him with rules instead of hope. I remembered my own childhood prayers whispered out of fear rather than trust. These memories no longer crushed me, they instructed me. I realized the message was not only for Muslims, but for anyone who builds faith on habit instead of relationship. Many believe safety is the highest virtue. Jesus showed me truth is safety can be lost in a moment. Truth remains. As I shared my story carefully with those willing to listen, I saw the same hunger in their eyes that once lived in me. Not rebellion, not hatred, but exhaustion. People are tired of pretending they are at peace when they are not. I spoke less about doctrine and more about encounter. Less about leaving something and more about being found. I told them I did not become braver when I chose Jesus. I became honest. The fear did not disappear. It simply lost its throne. Flashbacks still came. Moments from my old life when power felt intoxicating and certainty felt comforting. But those memories now felt flat compared to the quiet joy growing in me. I had traded control for trust. Some nights I still wrestled with anxiety, listening for sounds outside, calculating escape routes in my mind. Danger had not vanished. But even in those moments, I sensed Jesus near, not removing the threat, but removing its authority over my heart. I began to understand why he did not promise peace as the world defines it. He promised his presence. That presence became my anchor. I no longer measured my worth by how many approved of me, but by who had called me by name. When I read the Gospels, I saw myself in the crowds, in the Pharisees, even in the doubters, and I saw Jesus patient with all of them. The message burned in me because it was costly and freeing at the same time. Religion says obey and maybe you will be loved. Jesus says you are loved, now come and live. That difference changed everything. I spoke directly now, not hiding behind titles or anonymity. If you are listening to this, whether you are Muslim, Christian, or something in between, hear me carefully. God is not impressed by fear-driven obedience. He desires hearts that know Him. I am not asking you to become reckless. I am asking you to be honest. Truth may cost you safety, approval, even family. But lies will cost you your soul slowly, quietly, while convincing you everything is fine. I did not return from death with a threat. I returned with an invitation. Choose truth over safety. Choose grace over fear. Choose relationship over ritual. As days passed, joy surprised me in small ways. Laughter came easier. Gratitude replaced resentment. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and began to see myself as sent. My life was no longer mine to protect. It was a testimony entrusted to me. I did not know how long I would be free to speak. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew why I had been sent back, not to frighten, but to awaken, not to condemn, but to testify. Jesus did not rescue me from death so I could live quietly. He rescued me so I could live truthfully. And that truth continues to set me free even as the cost remains real. I am no longer afraid to live. The fear that once ruled my every decision, that whispered constantly in my ear, that held my body rigid and my heart smaller than it was meant to be, has been replaced by something I never thought possible. Peace that does not depend on circumstance. I wake each morning knowing that danger may come, that loss may deepen, that those I loved may never understand, but that none of it can touch the part of me that has been found. I am no longer Khalid the Sheik trying to measure worth through obedience or reputation. I am Khalid, a child of God, called by name, held by grace, walking in truth. Forgiveness has replaced resentment in me, not as an idea, but as a reality. I forgive those who rejected me, who threatened me, who tried to erase me, because in their fear they acted without knowing. I forgive myself for the years I spent hiding, for the pride that felt like piety, for the obedience born of terror instead of love. Every day I pray aloud now, sometimes alone, sometimes with the secret community that has become my spiritual family. I read scripture with hunger, not as a scholar memorizing rules, but as a soul drinking water after a long drought. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The words echo in my mind constantly. I do not understand all of it, never will in this lifetime, but I live it. My message to you, whoever you're listening, is simple yet terrifying in its clarity. Examine your heart. Do not trust ritual alone. Do not hide behind what others expect. Do not let fear determine your faith. God calls each of us by name. He sees every hidden thought, every suppressed longing, every silent cry for help. And He calls anyway. When He calls, you cannot unhear it. I know now that death is not the final arbiter of truth. Life lived honestly, surrendered completely, is the arena in which faith is proven. I do not speak to impress. I do not teach to be revered. I speak because I must, because someone somewhere may hear and choose life. I have been tested by death, by betrayal, by fear, and I have seen what comes when truth is met without compromise. Freedom. I am free from the weight of others' expectations. I am free from the terror that once ruled my mind. I am free from pretending I know what I cannot. And in that freedom, I have discovered joy, not shallow or fleeting, but deep, enduring, and anchored in presence. My life is no longer my own. It belongs to Him who called me from darkness into light. I walk daily in uncertainty and sometimes in danger, but I am not afraid. I speak His name openly when I can, and silently when I must, and in both I am sustained. If you are listening, take heart. Whether you are a believer, a seeker, or a doubter, know this. Jesus still calls by name. He sees you, He knows you, and He waits for the moment when you too can step into truth. My story is no longer about death, fear, or loss. It is about the one who gave me life, who revealed Himself despite my ignorance, my pride, my hiding. And now I live fully, freely, faithfully, unafraid, because the one who called me has never let go. I pray that wherever you are, you hear that call, that you answer it, and that your life too may be transformed beyond fear, beyond expectation, beyond what you thought was possible. I am Khalid, and I have been found, and so can you.